we are going to get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar. We're very excited to speak on the QMS documentation under MDR. We have some great presenters today. So I will intro our main two speakers, starting with Danielle. We are coming from MedEnvoy Global. She is the Director of Regulatory Affairs and PRC at MedEnvoy Global. And you can read on her experience over on the left. And then our main presenter today will be Salman Raza. He's the Principal Consultant at Resolution Bureau. We're very excited and happy to have him today to provide a notified body expert perspective on this topic. So our agenda for today, diving right in, we will be going over the QMS under the MDR, as mentioned. Next slide, please, for the yes, thank you. Auditing QMS under MDR, and then most common NCs identified during the audits. At the very end, we will share these presentation slides along with the recording. If you do have any questions that come up through the presentation, feel free to pop them in that same question box. And we do have a moderator also on our team, Daryl Wisdahl, another Senior Regulatory Affairs Consultant on our team. So he'll be in there answering questions. If we don't get to your question, we will make sure to follow up with an email. So pop them in there if you do have any questions. We will have a short Q&A session at the end, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So without further ado, let's dive in. Salman, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me on this session. And welcome everyone who is joining from every corner of the globe by the sounds of it. So let's get to the topic. One thing that I wanted to add that despite is in addition to being a consultant, I'm an active auditor. I'm contracted auditor with a few notified bodies. So what we are going to cover is exactly what we audit during notified body audits on site for MDR. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. So, okay, so let's start. As we spoke, the agenda today is the quality management system aspects under the MDR that are covered in Annex 9 of the regulation. So we'll go through the questions that auditors ask during the audit, and what are the intent and exactly what they're looking for, what their expectations. So that's the aim for this session. So if we go through the next slide. So that's what we are looking for. So during an on-site audit, so you appreciate that there are two segments under MDR or any other regulation. So one's first session of the audit is on-site, covering the quality management system aspects against MDR. And then the second portion is the technical documentation review. So most of the time, technical documentation review happens remotely after the quality management system audit. So when we are on site looking for and auditing your quality management system, we are assessing the processes that you have put in place to demonstrate compliance against the regulation. And then the output of those processes, that will be your actual technical documentation by a technical expert. So most of the notified body audits, you have to get through to this segment. Once you have shown that you have adequate procedural and process controls in place, only then your technical documentation will be eligible for further review. So during an on-site quality management system audit, notified bodies are covering approximately 35 to 40 questions, depending on the product type and classification. But generally, they look for those questions. So audit duration can vary from a few days to a whole week or 7-8 days, depending on the number of products and number of products and families and the classification. So we will go through the question. If we go through the next slide, please. So as you have, most of you are aware that medical device regulation, for the quality management system aspects of it, we ride on ISO 13485 management system framework. So ISO 13485 is a standard that we for quality management system is one of the recognized standards, harmonized standard. So within that framework, we will be asking a specific question. So one of the first questions we ask about subcontracted activities. So the intent of that question is, as a manufacturer, does your quality management system has sufficient controls over any activity or process that you have subcontracted to a third party? So possibly sterilization activity. Sometimes you even use the contract manufacturing organizations, any regulatory compliance aspects. So anything that you have subcontracted, you must identify what are those activities. So one of the fundamental and critical point to understand for any audits under MDR, your decision, whatever your decision and approach is as a manufacturer, it has to be clearly documented and visible. So anecdotal responses are usually not acceptable. So we expect subcontracted activities are clearly identified, and then what auditors are looking for, they're looking for the arrangements and controls that you have put in place with those subcontracted partners. That could be your contractual agreement, could be one of the areas that you can demonstrate the effectiveness over their activities if they manage quality management systems certified against recognized standards such as 13485 or any other controls. Do you conduct audits on them? How do you control? So they must be clearly identified, the subcontracted activities, and we demonstrate controls, how we have collected controls. Subsequently, we look into the unannounced audit aspects of it. So unannounced audit is not a new requirement anymore. It has been in place for at least 10 years now. So what the intent is, that how does your management system include the possibility of having an unannounced audit? So does your QMS has a procedure, either dedicated procedure or embedded in a existing procedure where you identify that you have understood the requirements of unannounced audit, and does your procedure covers that? In addition to your procedures, one of the things that auditors are looking for, have you ensured that your critical suppliers and your subcontractors, they are also aware of that requirement, because notified bodies are entitled to unannounced audit your critical suppliers. So they have to entertain notified bodies and allow them to access unannounced and assess the process activities that you are performing for that particular, they are performing for you as a manufacturer. So what we're looking for as an auditor, we're looking for if you have adequate procedure that identifies how you will entertain and manage the unannounced audit, who are the individuals. We must have indication of who to interact with notified body auditors, and some logistics from your point of view. One of the unwritten rules that notified bodies follow, that they expect to be on manufacturing floor very quickly. So as soon as they arrive, they usually are 2 auditors minimum. As soon as they arrive, they will identify themselves as notified body auditors here to conduct unannounced audit. They expect to be on manufacturing floor within 30 minutes. So what you have to make sure that your procedure has indication that don't use delaying tactic, because it will go against you. Whenever you have an auditor on site, make sure, of course, you do have to do uh, arrange things in meeting rooms or whatever logistic you need to prepare, but be mindful that any undue delay can go against you. So their intent is to be on the shop floor, on the manufacturing floor as soon as possible, not later than 30 minutes. So that's the intent. So your procedure should have indication of those elements. And your contractual agreement with your critical suppliers must have indication and coverage, and they must agree that they will allow notified bodies to conduct unannounced audit on them. So these are the two main aspects that auditors are looking for: the coverage of unannounced audit at your critical supplier, and of course the procedure and how you will manage. So I believe we have a couple of polls questions. So can we have poll 1? What's the questions? So okay, looks like we have good, excellent. Okay, so that sounds good. Okay, so we have quite a big number of medical device manufacturers, so that's good to know. Are we going poll 2 as well to go through, or there you go. So which medical device classes are you currently working on, QMS? Okay. Right, so we have a good mix. Right, so that's good information. Thank you for participating on those polls. That's very useful information. So in terms of unannounced audit, we indicated that these are the two main intent, and then the elements that we're looking for is the procedure and contractual agreements. Moving on to our next slide, we have we're looking at the procedure for change notification. So as a manufacturer, you must have a process in place where you notify changes, any significant change to your notified body, as well as any other regulators. But from notified body perspective, we are looking as an auditor that if you have a procedure, how do you assess the change, and once you have identified that it is a significant change eligible for notification to your notified bodies, then we need to notify them. So there must be a procedure. It could be a dedicated procedure. The information could be embedded within another procedure, but we need to have that information visible. What we're looking for as an auditor is that not only that you have procedures in place, is how you are assessing your changes. So we will look at the change log and see if you have assessed changes, and both set of information, the scenarios where you decided that you have to notify this change to notified body, and scenarios where you decided it doesn't qualify to be notified. So both information type, looking at your change log, we would be, as an auditor, we will be looking at how you are making sure that appropriate changes are notified. A lot of notified bodies have dedicated forms, their forms, and they expect manufacturers to notify changes using their forms. So depending on your notified body, you have to make sure that you have access to the latest version of their forms. Every notified body has their own communication method. They communicate to their clients how to access those forms. Some have given access through their website. Some request you to have your portal. Some say email us and then we'll send you the whatever the mechanism you have established with your notified body. But the point is that you have to follow your notified body's guidelines how to report a change. A lot of notified bodies, as I said, they have a dedicated change notification form, and then you should report them. So auditors are also looking at your change notification records if you have reported using the correct form and adequate details and that type of thing. So that's the process of change notification. Then we look at the product classification process. So again, it's a process. We are looking at, do you have a procedure in place? Do you have any indication, any defined stepwise how to assess product classification in accordance with MDR? There are very detailed version of classification rules defined in Annex 8 of the MDR. So the auditors are looking in your procedures of how you are managing classification process. So again, focus is on process, but using that process, how you are documenting and how you are rationalizing your decisions. So details are expected to be visible in your QMS documentation. So procedure, your QMS, and of course the project specific, the product specific documentation using that procedure. So these are the expected outcome that we look to see. Moving on, after the classification, of course, product classification will be thoroughly reviewed again at the technical documentation review step, but on-site quality management system audits focusing on the process. If you have process in place to go through all the rules and identify the appropriate requirements and information, intended use, intended profile, the transition, the short-term or long-term contact with the body. So all these good information that we expect under Annex 8, we as an auditor, we would like to see in procedures so that you know how to classify your devices. If we can go to next slide, please. Subsequent to the classification, we are looking at the registration process. What you have, do you have a procedure to register your devices, registration in UDAMED? So for example, if you have a class 1 device, you don't necessarily need an notified body, but you still have to register your product with your competent authority. Or register as in the UDAMED database. Similarly, for custom-made devices and procedure packs, if you have adequate procedures are in place, how to register those devices accordingly. Based on your adopted method and products and classification, they will be assessed in that. But fundamentally, from process point of view, you must have a process in place to demonstrate that what are the requirements that are applicable to you for registration and how you're managing it. So what we are looking for a lot of time, we are looking for if you have obtained a single registration number, SRN, if they are class 1 devices, if they are adequately registered with competent authority. If you're outside Europe, if your authorized rep has that information? Have they facilitated that process? So these are the type of evidence that we look for when we're looking at the registration. And then of course we have in requirements for authorized European Union representative. So intent is to ensure that you have a contractual agreement in place. They have mandate to represent you within Europe, and of course what we're looking for the contract in place, the name, address, the PRRC, and all the information that goes with the EU authorized rep. We are looking the contract itself covers all the critical elements and information required by the MDR for EU reps. So I believe there is another poll we have in, for this step. So let's have a next poll. Okay, looks like okay, that's good mix. So that's good. So EU representative, if the good thing is, if you are working with a recognized a reputable EU authorized app such as MedOnY, their contract is very detailed. So there's a good chance that there is no missing elements. But some of the, from auditing perspective, some of the lesser known and smaller EU representative, so they the contracts are not as detailed, and there are information that sometimes not covered in the contract. So it always pays to work with someone who is who has expert in their field, and then they contract is covering a lot of things. So you can rely on your partner as EU rep so that they know what they're doing, and then you can rest assured that they have covered and all these requirements. So moving to the next step, we are going to look at the declaration of conformity. Again, we are looking at the process. How do we have a procedure in place? It doesn't have to be dedicated to procedure, but there should be a procedure that talks about declaration of conformity. Declaration of conformity must be compliant with the requirements of Annex 4. So we just look at the template form of a declaration and then make sure that it is covering all the elements as per Annex 4 of the regulation. External documents, again, we would like to see that as a manufacturer, you have access to all the external documents and they are controlled, including the directive, standards, the guidance documents. So they should be part of your document control system, and then they cover all the elements and controls so that the users within your organization only use the latest version of the document. So again, so we are looking at that. Do you have access to external documents, and if they are adequately controlled? So for declaration of conformity, I mentioned the MDR requirements. Our Swiss medics, they have some additional requirement, and I would like colleague Danielle to step in to explain a little more on Swiss requirements for DOC. Danielle?
It looks like she may be frozen, so maybe we come back to that.
Okay, yeah, we can come back on that. So can you hear us, Danielle?
Yes, I can.
Yes, so you wanted to speak about the declaration of conformity requirements for Switzerland?
Yeah, so what we notice is that Switzerland has a specific requirement regarding DUCs of legacy devices. So just to remind all participants that Switzerland is not accepting declarations of conformity that are signed after the date of applications of the MDR for legacy devices when addressing non-significant changes. So if you have non-significant changes, those changes need to be documented on a document accompanying the declaration of conformity, such that the original declaration of conformity that is signed prior to the date of application to the MDR is still there and valid as such.
Excellent. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you, Danielle. So we are looking for a document and record retention period, so it must be defined. Of course, if you should have a document and record control procedures. The lifetime of the device must be clearly defined. The retention time should be defined. Of course, in most cases, non-implantable, it should be at least 10 years. And of course, if it's implantable, at least 15 years. So we need to see those things that it should be clearly identified. In terms of the PRRC, we want to see that you have a clear indication and designation of individual or person responsible for regulatory compliance. So that clearly should be visible through a designation letter, through their job description. Important thing is that it is clearly identifying. So anecdotal response that I am the PRRC or he is the PRRC is not adequate. We need to see a formal designation in a letter or a organization chart indication, and then in addition we see the job description capturing all the elements, all the requirements that are associated with the PRRC. So PRRC you can see in the MDR, you can call it there are specific qualification criteria. There are 2 criteria defined, and you have to demonstrate that following this criteria, this individual is eligible to be the PRRC. It's gone are those days when anyone can be anyone. So, for example, management rep in the ISO 13485, anyone can be management rep as long as they have some indication of management responsibility. But PRRC, they're looking for a specific qualification, and you have to meet that requirement to be a PRRC. Similarly, our Swiss colleagues have some additional expectations. So let me invite Danielle again to talk a little about Switzerland requirement.
Yeah, so for Switzerland, so although it's very good practice to have a deputy PRC available within your organization, for Switzerland, that is mandatory as per MEDO Article 49.2. So for Switzerland, each manufacturer must have a deputy PRC assigned, which follows then the same rules as explained by Salman, that it should be documented, etc. And it cannot be alternating responsibilities. There should be 2 persons fulfilling the role of the PRC on all the different elements of the MDR and the MEDO.
Thank you, Danielle. And one point that I want to emphasize, even though the alternative or backup PRRC is mandated by Switzerland, not quite mandated in general by the MDR, but a lot of notified bodies, they are kind of enforcing that anyway. So it's always a good idea to have identified the alternative PRRC and backup PRRC. Same as the PRRC, the qualification criteria, designation, and job description should have those information visible. So moving on to our next question, which is, if we go to next slide, please. So the journal safety and performance requirements. So your GSPR. So again, the process is our intent, process is our focus. So we are, as on-site audit, we are looking at, do we have a process in place to manage the requirements of general safety and performance requirement? How do you connect these requirements into your design inputs? How do you connect these requirements to your risk management? So the process is the focus. Now, of course, as a snapshot, auditors will look at some individual claims on your completed GSPR checklist. A lot of times it is a checklist, but they are not challenging the necessarily the contents of the uh, claim or the veracity or the evidence of compliance against that claim. They are focusing on the process. Have you identified the process? Have you included elements of GSPR into your design inputs and design? And then how do you identify which requirements are applicable, not applicable? If not applicable, what are the justification? So all these elements from process point of view, and of course, as a part of the process, they will sample one or two or maybe more actual requirement, and then they take that as an evidence that you understand as as a manufacturer, you understand the requirements and the process is effectively implemented. Then general design and design control and design changes management. Primarily, we will be relying on ISO 13485 as an auditor. So the so your process for design and design control is primarily must be compliant as per 13485. But as I mentioned, what we are looking for under MDR, that you are identifying GSPR and all the other MDR requirements as your design input. So within your design documentation and design procedures, it should be visible that MDR considerations have taken into place. It's not an afterthought. You don't prepare your technical documentation once the product is ready. You follow the process from the beginning, and you are aware of the requirements at design input steps. So that's the fundamental point, and this is what auditors look for, that when we look at sample documents, sample project, we look at how did you identify MDR requirements into your design, project design specification and inputs. Moving on to our next set of questions. Technical documentation. So again, we are focusing on the process. So we assess, do you have a procedure in place, how to generate technical documentation, who will be involved in the technical documentation preparation, what is the frequency of the review of the technical documentation, if there is a change required, how do you manage those changes? So we are looking that you have a process in place, ideally a procedure, that a dedicated procedure that explains how do you generate the technical documentation, how do you maintain, and how do you update. So that's one of the critical element. For detailed requirements, what we are expected to see, Annex 2 of the MDR explains the technical documentation requirement, and of course Annex Z talks about the post-market surveillance. By the way, we will have a dedicated session on technical documentation and post-market surveillance. So we will cover that in next sessions. Process validation. Again, we primarily rely on ISO 13485 framework for assessing process validation. But if you have identified any critical manufacturing step that requires to be validated, then it will be subject to assessment. What we are looking for, if you identified what processes requires to be validated, and if you are validating them accordingly. Moving on to our next set of questions. Next slide, please. Labeling and IFU and CE, same principle. Focus is on process. So how do you generate label? How do you review label? How do you approve label? And how do you control the approved version of the label? So these are the elements. So procedurize elements, and how do we maintaining and capturing all the requirements from GSPR 23 into your process procedures, and then as a sample, we will take a version of a label and then follow through these elements. UDI is another area of interest. So how do you manage UDI, your unique device identification? So do you have a procedure? Do you have identified which agency you will be using for UDI management? And the procedure should identify the management of UDI DI and UDI PI and all those elements. It is assessed and from sample basis. So we take a sample and follow through if you have followed your own procedure, and procedure has covered all the requirements. Moving on to our next slide, we will be talking about the vigilance and field safety corrective action and field safety notification. So again, procedure, we're focusing on procedure, covering all the requirements of MDR, particularly Article 87 to 89. So we're making sure the procedure has all the elements, and then if that is detailed enough, and you have enough controls and competence to manage that. A lot of times procedure is one of the elements that auditors look. Conversation, the interview process also is used as a gauge to assess the competence and how much auditee they are aware of the requirement. So the response and experience is also taken into consideration. So we already have spoken about UDI. Danielle, what do you want to?
Yeah, so maybe good to address here that for although Switzerland again follows MDR quite nicely, in case of field safety corrective actions, they have a specific own template to be used, and they also require their field safety notices in the 3 mandatory languages for Switzerland, which are German, Italian, and France. So please ensure that if you are in such a situation, just go quickly to the Swissmedic website, where on the side on the economic operator, because there Swissmedic nicely laid out all the links to the forms that you can use in that case. And obviously,
the language requirement applies to the instructions for use and label as well for Swiss, because they have 4 languages. So you need to
exactly. And as an authorized rep, we anticipate to see also those elements like, okay, who is involved in reporting vigilance and field safety corrective actions? So what is the role of an in-country rep? And that can be in different territories, but that should be clarified as such.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the key things that we look at in the defined process, that demarcation of responsibility, who is doing what. So we don't assume that EU RAP will notify to authorities, competent authorities, or manufacturer will. So whoever is taking whichever action, you have whatever your adopted approach is, it should be clearly defined and who will take what action. So define the process and identify the responsibilities clearly. So moving on to our next set of questions. So device testing. So what we are looking at is a lot of times your technical documentation also identify critical steps. So we are, as an auditor, we are observing the final release and final testing of the process. What are the critical steps that you have identified in your your technical documentation? So on-site auditors, they observe the actual testing being performed and assess the controls implemented around that device testing. So if you're doing any specific electrical safety testing or specific any bioburden testing, whatever you're doing for specific to that product, uh, auditors expected to observe that and then document their rationale and evidence. In terms of preclinical and clinical evaluation, again, the focus is on process. Do you have a defined procedure for identifying activities relevant to preclinical and clinical evaluation? And if you have covered all the elements from the MDR, and we are, as I keep saying, that we are not going to review the actual claims at this step. This will be done at the technical documentation review, but the on-site QMS audit is focusing on that you have a procedure in place and they're looking that you have followed the procedure while generating the clinical evaluation plan and report. The contents of the report and plan are not their main focus at the QMS audit. Moving on to our next set of questions. Post-market surveillance is one of the most area of scrutiny, and this is one of the reasons why we will have a separate session on post-market surveillance next week. But the intent is during the audit that we will assess there is a documented procedure in place and the procedure captures all the requirements as explained in article in Annex Z and article 80, 88, 87. So we make sure that you have all those elements covered in procedure. And once you have established a procedure, auditors are looking for have you followed your procedure? So we'll look at the actual plan that you have put in place, depending on the classification of the product. If it's a class 2 and above, we will look at the periodic safety update report in addition to the plan. And if it's a class 1 product, your post-market surveillance report. But there are, of course, we are looking at the procedure that is compliant with the requirement, and you are following the procedure by generating plans and the report in accordance with the published guidance, such as MDCG 2221 that was issued for the PSUR. One of the elements, one of the requirements that a lot of manufacturers are not aware of is MDR now require manufacturers to have a liability insurance enough to cover any potential liability claims, so that manufacturer must have adequate provisions to financially compensate if anyone claims any injury or damage. So auditors now, notified bodies, are asking for liability insurance. So we now say, show me that you have your insurance, liability insurance, and we assess the coverage of that. So we are not the insurance experts, but we are looking from process point of view, from awareness point of view, what you have covered, what type of device, what is the context in which your device is being operated, and do you have adequate coverage. So if you have a class 3 implantable device and your insurance coverage is for $100, that won't fly. So we need to have proportionate coverage that is relevant with your classification of the device and depending on the profile of that device. So I think we have another poll ready to be floated. So So be brave. You can answer. There's no penalty for answering questions. So feel free to mark your comments. They are anonymous. Don't worry about it. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. So there were some specific aspects that we haven't covered because of the time constraints. So one of the elements that auditors on site are checking is device-specific information. So you at the initial contract step with your notified body, you have identified the intended use and product classification. So on-site auditors are making sure that it is consistent what we have contracted to do as a notified body. So they will be assessing and aligning that your internal documents and the contractual documents, they are for the same device, same intended use, same classification. Some elements that we have not covered today are incoming and final inspection, some continual improvement aspects of it. Again, 13485 is one of the framework that we use. Some class 3 specific requirement like SSC, we haven't covered because of time constraints. We haven't covered custom-made devices requirements, Article 22, procedural prac, and type test examination certificate. So they are becoming a lot rare. So they are possible, but it's not quite prevalent route that manufacturers take, so therefore we haven't covered. But if you do have any specific questions on these topics, please feel free to send your questions and we will try our best to respond as soon as we can. Moving on to our next slide. So some of the key non-conformities that we have noticed and observed. So if we as an auditor, we see, if you get to the next slide, please, we see some subcontracting activities. So subcontracted activities are not defined, or critical suppliers contracts are not in place. Unannounced audit, we don't have procedure, or the contractors, critical suppliers don't have enough coverage in their contract to allow unannounced audits. Change notification not being reported to notified bodies, justifications are not clearly documented, registration are not clear, and the demarcation between responsibilities within the economic operators, registrations, who is the EU RAP, who is the EU importer, who are the distributors. So demarcation must be clearly defined and visible in the UDAMED and your so we have a separate session for economic operators in a few weeks' time. So, but it is one of the key areas that we notice non-conformance frequently. Moving on to the next slide. PRRC requirements are not clearly defined. They are not adequately qualifying against the criteria that is given in the guidance documents and MDR. Post-market surveillance, there's no plan sometimes, or the procedure is not followed in the plan. So the traditional, we'll talk more about post-market surveillance related activities and non-conformance next week. Post-market clinical follow-up, no documented PMCF, even if it is not required. So there's a general misconception that I don't need it, there's no residual risk, so I don't need to have it. That's not acceptable anymore. Notified bodies expect you to have a post-market clinical follow-up plan, a formal document. In that document, you can justify why you don't need it and what are the reasons for which you don't have to conduct a clinical follow-up per se, but you must have a post-market clinical follow-up process and plan. And of course, we mentioned the liability insurance. A lot of companies, they don't have that in place, and we are noticing quite frequently that either it's not in place or not adequate coverage in their management system. So these are, I believe, is what we had planned to cover this week. We have little time left, so we'll start some questions. I believe you have some questions.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Very informative. Yeah, we have a couple questions that were submitted in advance, so we'll go through those to start, and there was a couple others that came in the chat. So first question, what are the most common reasons for nonconformities during MDR audits, and what if a nonconformity is found?
Excellent question. So non-conformities that we just covered, that these are the common non-conformities, procedures not in place or procedures not being followed. So we just had that conversation. If a non-conformity is identified during this audit, depending on the nature of the audit, it follows the same principle as any other regulatory audit. So you have a certain number of time, 90 days to close a major non-conformance, 180 days to close a minor non-conformance. However, you have to bear in mind that you will not get MDR certificate at the end of this QMS audit. So the non-conformities identified at this step are not as critical because your technical documentation still has to be reviewed quite thoroughly. So you will have enough time to address the non-conformance. As long as you are committed to MDR, you will follow the same guidelines as usual. Major non-conformities needs to be addressed within 90 days, minor non-conformities within 180 days, and hopefully they will be addressed before your technical documentation gets reviewed, so there should not be any impact on it.
Great, thank you. Let's try to fit in one more question. So we had one, how should manufacturers document software validation for MDR audits?
Okay, excellent. So software is an interesting topic, and we will use primarily the 13485 mechanism and framework. So under 13485, there are 4 different types of software mentioned that requires validation. Your quality management system software, clause 4.1.6, and your production process covered in clause 7.5.6. If there are sterilization process, that is 757. And then of course, your design, product design, the product software, the embedded software or the actual software, that is covered under clause 737. And of the other QMS software like monitoring and measuring and devices. So depending on the type of your software, you will require to validate accordingly using the same framework as ISO 13485. So MDR expect you to identify the processes that you require to validate and validate based on the risk associated with it. So that's the traditional validation expectations. Danielle, do you want to add something onto validation aspects of it?
No, not specific. No, we don't see specific topics there from an EAR point of view, Salman. But I think software validation is interesting and can be done in multiple ways. So I can imagine that is the origin of this question as well.
Excellent.
Great.
Okay.
So just taking a look at the time, we are going to wrap up here. Thank you, Salman. Thank you, Danielle. That was wonderful. So we will be sharing the presentation slides along with a recording. So you'll receive that in your inbox, everyone. Thank you again for attending. As Salman mentioned, we do have the next session is at the same time next Wednesday on post-market surveillance. So be on the lookout for that. And we hope to see you there. And thank you very much.